Hey, sorry guys. If for those of you who are actually listening to my chapters in the correct order, and you've been watching the first 4 of them, and now you're trying to find chapter 5, and you couldn't, that was because I tried to upload 12 chapters at one time, and a glitch happened somehow that chapter 5 and chapter 11 did not get uploaded, so this is me rereading it to upload it, because the video won't work. So, here goes. Chapter 5, The Trail of Shards. War is a violent sport. Yes, I did say sport. We sat next to each other at breakfast. Jackson was across the table, bless his soul, eating a pancake. He had already fallen into the first of the cruel traps, and was staring right at us. Lisa had hired some poor waitress to place syrup on his chair. He wasn't dressed in the same clothes as this morning, which told me that he had opened his wardrobe. Lisa and I had rigged that one ourselves. The second he pulled on the knob, the leftovers from last night's event would have been launched towards his face. I never did get a chance to ask if that had worked. Oh well. His eyes were locked on Lisa, watching him She watched him menacingly. The adults of both families were indulging in friendly conversation when the first shot was fired. Lisa casually loaded her fork with strawberries, pulling it back under the table, and in one foul, swift motion, brought it up above her plate and released. She hit him perfectly in the nose. His eyes widened in shock. None of the adults had noticed. I looked back at Lisa, who was minding her own business, eating her toast with great interest. She turned to ask me to pass the jelly when 3 high-speed blueberries hit her smack dab in the forehead. The look on her face was pure shock, as if she had never expected him to fight back. But this was Jackson. He was nothing if not a gentleman, but he would never have stood for that. Not even if he knew what was about to unfold. "That's it," Lisa shrieked, jumping to her feet. "You're on!" Jackson jumped up as well. "Uh-oh," I said, scrambling to get behind a curtain or an open door. Something. The adults had taken note of the situation and were doing the same. That wasn't the first time that Lisa and Jack had gone to war. They had had many of these little fights, and these parents were all too used to this sort of event. "I was wondering why he was covered in cake this morning," Mrs. Dwent commented. "I take it this is the favor you two were talking about earlier?" Genevieve was giving me the eye from the other side of the table we were now both hiding behind. I smiled. I started. "I know who did it. But this is what I was talking about before. You need to stop following her lead. She has good intentions. She just needs to set some boundaries. Now, you should know that she's never going to set those boundaries without you telling her no sometimes." "I know, but her will is much stronger than mine," I defended, and Genevieve sighed and stood up. She wore a long green silky dress, and her hair was long and straight. She stood perfectly still, posture tall, and eyes forward. I peeked over the edge of the table to see the mass destruction. Fruits, berries, syrups, and breads were cluttered everywhere. The 2 children had stopped fighting and were now looking at my aunt. They had breakfast in their hair, hands, and Jack had a syrup stain on his rear. They looked down to the floor in shame, and my aunt fiercened the look on her face, making it clear that she was in no mood for an excuse. Somebody is going to pay for this, and I'm not in charge of Jackson, so it looks like that person is you, Lisa. Her voice was cold as stone. "Even if I had the responsibility over him, I don't believe it was him that started this. Am I mistaken?" Lisa hung her head and shook no. Genevieve turned to me. "You are dismissed." I nodded a slight bow to the Dwents and mouthed "good luck" to Jackson. I walked a little distance down the hall and then stopped mid-stride. I couldn't do it. I couldn't let them all get in trouble, especially Jack, when I was just as guilty as he. Not in the food fight, but for climbing the wall and going to the willow. I had led that little expedition, and I was not and am not a coward. I would confess, because like my mother had always said, to live with guilt is like being haunted by your own wrongdoing, and it never goes away. It's much easier to accept your punishment and be done. I turned back and stood outside of the main door. I stopped, not to interrupt. Some waiters and the chef were leaving. I stayed where I was. "I don't know what you were thinking. This is the 7th time," Genevieve's voice echoed in the main hall. Lisa was quiet. My aunt sighed and went to address Jack. I know it's terribly rude of me to advise you on how to punish your children, but I don't believe that any of this was really Jack's fault, even if he did partake in the food war. Jackson, does Mrs. Genevieve speak the truth? His mother asked. Jack never had the same sense of guilt that I did, so his reply was little better than lying altogether. Well, if that's the case, then I may see you, Miss Genevieve, at dinner tomorrow. Jackson, you may spend your day as you wish. He walked past me in the doorway, as did his parents. The only people left were my cousin and her mother. They stood quietly for a moment. Lisa was avoiding her mother's eyes at all costs, but I could tell, by a lack of defensive comments, that the war had already been won by my aunt. She was, after all, undefeated. I entered the room casually, cautiously, making sure not to step in the syrup. There's more. I broke the silence. I don't want to hear it. She looked very disappointed. I want you to hear it, even if you tune me out. You know how my mother felt about guilt. I pushed. She closed her eyes, and Lisa watched patiently. Then your punishment will be to live with that guilt, and if you think more punishment is necessary, you can start by helping Lisa clean this mess. She must have been mindlessly upset, because I had never seen her drop her head like that when she got mad. And trust me, I'd seen her mad quite a lot. I bent down and picked up a plate off the ground. She dropped her jaw just slightly, and her eyes softened. I'm sorry. I know that you got that belief from your mother. I nodded, and she left the room, leaving Lisa and I behind. We looked each other in the eye, but she dropped the contact almost immediately. We worked for the next few hours. And that's the end of Chapter 5. So, hope you enjoyed, and tune in for Chapter 6.